Welcome to Off the Coast, where we examine the views from Vancouver Island with your host, Rosemary Barnes. New and exciting things, preserved and respected things, business, recreation, politics, travel, all from the point of view of the people living and working on the island. Rosemary is a professional speaker and certified speaking coach living in historic Ladysmith and loving every day of the island life. Here is your Vancouver Island host, Rosemary.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Off the Coast, Views from Vancouver Island. I'm Rosemary Barnes, your host for today, the Maverick Voice at Confidence Stages. Today I am very happy, and I use the word quite deliberately, I'm very happy to introduce you to Paul Krismer, who is the Chief Happiness Officer and founder of the Happiness Experts Company. All right, is everyone ready to meet the man that's going to teach us all how to be happy? Paul is a noted public speaker and trainer. His teaching is powerful, authoritative, and best of all, convincing. At the same time, Paul is exceptionally practical. He makes real his conviction that happiness is for everyone. And indeed, everyone leaves his courses inspired to put their learning into practice. Paul Krismer has a proven track record as an inspirational leader. For 20 years, he has served in senior management roles, overseeing hundreds of staff, multiple leaders, multi-million-dollar projects, and cheerfully growing future leaders. As a certified executive coach, Paul is appreciated for his kind-hearted yet relentless pursuit of the client's best life. Helping people to reach greater happiness and success is his trademark promise. His forthcoming book, Whole Person Happiness, aims to give everyone access to his expertise. Well, I, for one, am quite ready to buy the book, even if it's not printed yet. Welcome to the show, Paul.
It's a real pleasure, Rosemary. Thank you.
How wonderful it is to meet someone who understands the importance that happiness holds in creating a satisfying work life and personal life, and that if you're not happy, everything is affected. All right, now, were you always a happiness expert? How does one come to be a happiness expert?
Well, it's a funny question. I guess to some small degree, I did have a propensity from a very young age to see the world pretty optimistically. And I had a very low tolerance for low moods, and always have. So when I had a funk going on, I was always looking for a way to get out of it. Like there should be an answer. And with that motivation, I guess as time went by, particularly having served in many leadership positions where I was exposed to a lot of some of the great success experts and business experts and read a lot. Then in the early 2000 period, when positive psychology was beginning to make its mark in the world, I just couldn't get enough. Learned and love it. I just think everybody should see what modern science can tell us about positive emotions.
The world could use a lot more of that. I think so. In my great and glorious self-righteousness, I hereby state the world needs happier people.
Hear, hear, bravo.
The problem, of course, is, did you ever watch the movie Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy?
Yes, I think I did.
Where the answer to life, the universe, and everything is 42.
42. Mm-hmm.
42. So the problem, of course, was that they never really knew the question. So what I'm going to ask you next could really come up with an answer of 42, but I'm hoping you'll be able to be a better computer than was on that movie. What is happiness?
Well, that is a loaded question, and I do have an answer, but there are many different answers depending on who's doing the answering. Most of the scientific community seems to have kind of come to a conclusion that they're okay with this idea that happiness is simply subjective well-being. So So one's own personal perspective on the extent of their wellness. I don't really like that one. It's not an easy handle. Barbara Fredrickson, a brilliant scholar out of the University of North Carolina, it provides a very practical definition of happiness. She says it's an array of commonly felt emotions, and when we're experiencing any one of these emotions, we are in a state of happiness. And there's 10 of them. Shall I list them for you, Rosemary?
I really want to know what they are, because I am in a pursuit for happiness in a big way these days. So I really want to know what they are, and I want you to talk about each one if that's possible.
It certainly is. So these emotions, I'm going to list them for you in the order in which they're typically most frequently experienced. Now, some people are going to experience some of these emotions in different orders, but on average, people experience these emotions in this level of frequency. And so I'm going to give you 10 emotions, and maybe if you're game for us to play with your listeners a little bit, we can ask them to try to engage the actual feeling of these emotions as I describe them.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, you heard it here first. Get out your piece of paper and your pencil and play along with Paul and Rosemary on today's What Is It to Be Happy show. So, all right, listeners, Paul, I'm ready. Let's go. Let's see what we feel like when you say these words.
So the most commonly felt experience of happiness is something that we can relate to called joy. And joy is often associated with the conclusion of some activity where we've maybe accomplished something or experienced something that leaves us with that big smile on our face, that sense of elation. That's joy. And maybe if your listeners just thought for a moment, when was the last time they had an experience of joy? The next one is gratitude. Very commonly felt experience of happiness. And gratitude, of course, is simply that sense of appreciation, that something's come to us. Often our greatest appreciation happens when it's unexpected. And we know that it's through the kindness of someone else that we've received this blessing, if I can use that word, in our lives. So consider gratitude. The third one, which we all love so much, is called serenity. That sense of peacefulness that you may have quiet in your house, your kids have gone to bed, or work is done and there's a moment where there's no tasks that need to be done, nothing pressing on you, and you can simply breathe. Serenity.
Oh my, are you telling me that that's a possibility?
Well, I certainly hope so.
That's
for all of
us. Okay, I got to work on that one. All right.
The next one is interest. And this is one maybe people wouldn't often immediately associate with happiness, but it's when we're intrigued by something, where our imagination's being captured, where our focus is being happily applied on a particular subject. And in that moment, we don't realize that we're happy, but when we pause and step back from that subject that we were interested in, we can realize that was a rewarding experience to be learning and growing in some fashion by what we were paying attention to.
Okay.
The fifth emotion is hope. And this is the one that often comes with a little tinge of fear, that when we're afraid of something, the way to lift ourselves out of that is to have hope, to see some light, and to have some expectation for the future that's got a reasonableness to it, and say, oh yes, hope, I like that, that's where I'm going. The sixth one, and we Westerners sometimes struggle with this one, is the notion of pride. And I'm not talking about an unhealthy pride, I'm talking about when we just genuinely reflect on something that's near in our lives, our own accomplishments, or sometimes the accomplishments of the people we love, and just look back and say, that was awesome, that was great, and reflect on it with pride. The seventh emotion that Dr. Fredrickson illustrates is amusement. And we all know this one. It's really, I think she's talking mostly about laughter or things that make us smile. And almost always amusement is interpersonal. So it's about some other human interacting with us. And it's almost always unexpected. So something that happens in our environment with another human that is unusual and unexpected makes us smile, laugh. The eighth is
I'm writing. Wait. Unexpected. I'm in a deep learning thing. Therefore, it's interests, which is part of the happiness recipe. Unexpected and with another human. Okay,
very
I'm up
good.
to date. All right,
Good.
number
The eighth one
8.
is inspiration. And
Mm.
I hope that through the course of today, I leave your listeners with a bit of inspiration. It's when we are starstruck a little bit and yet motivated to move ourselves towards that star, that goal. And we're excited by it and passionate about something that's come into our minds that is evoking a sense that we want to act.
Hmm.
The
Evoking.
ninth
Okay.
is awe. And there's not usually very many words we can use for this one. It's the one that captures us speechless. It may be that when we're standing on the edge of the Grand Canyon and simply can't fathom the grandeur of the universe, or we're struck by an absolutely phenomenal artistic experience, maybe a singer just simply leaving us speechless with the beauty of their voice. That's 9.
That's 9. And there are few words that can be used instead of awe. And I don't mean like, dude, awesome shoes. Probably the most ruined word in the English language, but true awe is amazing. Amazing.
It is.
Sorry to interrupt. Number 10.
Not at all. So number 10 is a tricky one. And it's not necessarily the least frequent of these emotions. So the first 1 through 9 happen generally in that order. But the 10th could happen very frequently. And it's always a combination of the preceding 9 emotions I've described. And this one is called love. And we use love loosely in our English language. I could say I love ice cream. And when I reflect on the 9 previously mentioned emotions, I maybe am reflecting ice cream makes me joyful. I'm interested in ice cream. Maybe I can loosely use the word love. But when I talk about loving my children, then I'm talking about a rich array of happy emotions, that I'm joyful for them. I'm grateful for them. By the way, I rarely feel serenity with them, but I'm interested in
I
them.
was going
I'm
to say, yes.
hopeful. And they fill me with pride. I'm amused by them. All kinds of these combinations of the previous 9 emotions listed find themselves when we use that word love to describe an emotion. So there you have it. That's a very practical definition of happiness. And I like it because it simply says happiness is something that we've all known. It's accessible to us. It's readily understood. And when you look at those 9, 10 words, you can reflect back on times in your life in the past where you said, oh yeah, I felt that before. And that is what happiness is.
That's amazing to be able to actually delineate and specify words to describe happiness, because I dare say a great many people wouldn't be able to. So this would be, what a great tool to be able to express that with and realize what you're feeling. It's marvelous. All right, so now someone isn't feeling these things. Someone is, let's say, in the depths of depression, or is undergoing such huge stress that they're always on the brink of tears. And so it affects everything, because sometimes situations can be so horrific that the thought of feeling any of those 9 and or 10 is so far from possible. How do you begin to open your heart, your emotions, your minds, your senses, to be willing to let any of those back in?
Well, it's an excellent question, and I want to start by acknowledging that reality that I sometimes, as someone who labels himself as a happiness expert, it's people might think that I'm going to say that we should be happy at all times, and that happiness is our natural right, and that no matter what's going on in your life, you should be happy. And I don't believe that for a second. There are all kinds of circumstances and times in our lives where negative emotions prevail. And that's normal, natural, and in the right doses, probably even healthy. When people, though, are suffering profoundly from depression. I'm not the guy to provide clinical help, but I do have some opinions about it. I do know that by investing in well-being, in happiness, we provide a lot of additional protection from actually falling into pathological mental health states. And so there are parts of what I teach that I would encourage people who may consider themselves depressed to engage in. But first and foremost, they need to engage in traditional therapies associated with getting over depression. So that'd be cognitive behavioral therapy, perhaps antidepressants, that kind of thing. But happiness is accessible for all, even people who are in fairly deep, dark places. In fact, I've even worked sometimes with bereaved people who are grieving the loss of a loved one and want to start feeling happier. And so I have to invite them to try some of the things that I've got to teach, not with an expectation that there be a miracle cure overnight, but instead that simply happiness is something that they can work back into their lives and they become open to it again.
Have you ever heard of, and I'm really interested in going to one, but I've never taken the opportunity to go to what do they call them, laugh seminars or laugh classes, or and you just laugh.
Yeah, laughter yoga, I think sometimes they call it.
Laughter yoga, is that what it's called? And just the act of laughing, releases endorphins and all that kind of thing. So that would fall into amusement, would it? A laugh class? Would that fall into...
It even might fall into joy, in that our brains are not all that complicated. In fact, evolution worked marvelously to try to simplify the way that our brains operate. And so we can trick our brains into having certain emotions. We would think that joy, happiness, interest happens cerebrally, intellectually, that something captures our mind, we calculate what it means to us, and then we go, oh, I feel this or that about it. But our emotions are much more powerful than our intellect, and they happen much more automatically. And in fact, things like smiling or laughing, if you fake it, just put on a smile, the brain doesn't stop and say, why is Rosemary smiling right now? Or what's going on there? It just immediately says, oh, I associate that smile on this face, on my owner's face, with something that's good. So I think I'm going to feel good. And you would become cynical if you tried this all the time in the really depths of a bad mood and you put on a fake smile. It wouldn't necessarily work. But if you can put on a smile briefly or laugh for a few minutes, for no good intellectual reason, you will in fact take on the emotion associated with those physical behaviors. Which is kind of fun.
Well, yes. Not to mention that laughter itself burns an awful lot of calories, and if you weren't happy before, you can at least be happy about the few ounces that you lose along the way. And that would bring you much joy, I'm thinking. The one that interests me is hope. Could we talk about hope just a little bit? Because you said, if I'm remembering correctly, and if I'm wrong, please interrupt me, that hope often comes with a tinge of fear, but also underlaid with a possibility of success.
Yes.
Is that what you said?
Yes, indeed. You've got it.
Yeah.
And hope is an unusual emotion in so much as that, unlike all the rest there's almost always a negative component to it. It's that fear or sadness that is combined with hope, and the hopeful part is what makes us feel like we can lift out of that negative emotion.
That something will get better, or that a problem will be solved, or that you'll get what you're looking for, or that someone deems you good enough, right?
Well said. And if I could just expand on the thought, when we are feeling sad or fearful, if we're totally repressing that negative emotion, we are unlikely to feel hopeful. We're simply going to have a nagging sense that there's something that I'm ignoring. And the fear is there, the sadness is there, but I'm ignoring it and I'm trying to go on about my day. And that lack of acknowledgement of what's really knocking on our door precludes us from actually working through it. And hope is what comes after we've acknowledged fear and after we've acknowledged sadness. So I once heard a very beautiful Buddhist monk talk about this, and he said, you've got to sit down for tea with your negative emotions. Don't repress them. Don't close the door. If they're knocking on the door, say, fear, come on in. Sadness, come on. Have a seat. Would you like a cup of tea? And what have you got to tell me? And when we listen to these emotions, then they don't have to clamor away and knock at the door loudly and kind of eat away at our insides. They're received for the actual biological and emotional state that they are. And when we acknowledge them, have tea with them, listen to them, see if there's anything we can learn from them, then we can start to put them aside and say, thanks for visiting fear and sadness. Now, who else is here? And that's when hopefully, hope shows up and says, okay, I had fear and I got sadness, but there's a way out. There's something else coming.
How did you come to learn all of this, Paul?
Ha, ha,
ha. Sorry, was that too big a question?
Well, we'd have to go a long, long way back, but I've always had a very strong interest in working with other people. And so right from the time I was a kid, my family thought I'd be the one of the 6 children in the family. I was the youngest of 6. Maybe I'd be the one who'd become a priest. The other 5 got older, teenagers, and they escaped, and then the pressure was really on me. And so I've always had a desire to serve, and there's often been, for me, a deeply spiritual component to that. But the nuts and bolts of what I teach now is purely based on the best research that's going out there, and I'm mostly self-taught. I've got a ridiculous library that I'm looking at right now as we have this chat, and I just read everything I can. In fact, I'm so nerdy sometimes about this. I have a few people's master's thesis papers that I found on the internet and printed those off and read them too. So it's just a very, very strong interest. And the reason why I kind of moved from a very spiritual Catholic view of helping other people, then a kind of business and success literature, things like Jim Collins and Stephen Covey that I read in my early career, and said, these things are good too. But when in 2000 and beyond, positive psychology really started to make its mark on the world, I was blown away. And I was blown away because finally somebody was saying, here's how to live a happier, better life with evidence. We've researched it in a lab. We can do double-blind studies. We can have peer-reviewed publications. And you start saying, okay, there's a lot of other good material I've read before, and I don't discount a lot of what I've learned from other sources. But if I want to credibly call myself a happiness expert and credibly stand before somebody and say, you can in fact be happier, and here's some methodologies by which you can do it, I want to lean entirely on the strength of the science that's coming out. And it's emerging so rapidly with such power right now. It's very exciting.
It is. There are pros and cons to living in this information age, and I stand quite firmly in the pro side, provided we are well aware of the cons and deal with them. But then I try very hard to be a happy person, and so finding the positive is fairly important to me. But that's one of the ways I use to try and be happier, but I bet you have a lot more.
I have a few tricks.
I bet you do. I'd love to hear about them.
Well, let me start with one that's a bit esoteric, and some of your listeners may find this one more difficult to seize and take into their life on a regular basis than others. And then I'll get to some that maybe are really accessible, that anybody can start today and feel happier more or less tomorrow. But I'll start with the really kind of esoteric one. But I start with it because it is perhaps the number one happiness intervention that people can do, and it's been exceptionally well studied for the last 50 years, ever since the Beatles went to India. And that's meditation.
Okay.
Meditation has these tremendous benefits, and they're very well researched over many, many years. And the ones that are obvious are the greater calm that people experienced, the resilience that you get from stress, kind of reduced heart rate, reduce depressive symptoms, lower anxiety, all the kind of stuff that maybe intuitively makes sense to us. But there are other things with meditation, regular meditation, that come along too, and that includes improved clarity of thinking, that people perceive more problem-solving options. Their mind literally has the ability to manipulate ideas to a degree better than non-meditators. There's improved immune response, that people literally will have fewer colds and flus as a result of meditation. And that's because when our parasympathetic nervous system is stimulated, your listeners are going to get from that a greater ability for the brain to put away the cortisol, the stress hormones that stimulate us and get us riled up, and instead our immune response can be growing and being more successful when our parasympathetic nervous system is activated. We get better sleep. Your listeners will love to know that you get enhanced sexual function with meditation, improved memory, task focus. There's quicker recovery from both physical and emotional traumas. There's no doubt about it that interpersonal relationships tend to be better for people who are regular meditators. It's just this tremendous array of benefits that it's so persuasive now. The science is so good that in the same way that no physician could deny the importance of nutrition and exercise for a healthy body, it will not be many years at all before no physician could with integrity deny the benefits of meditation for a healthy mind.
That's huge, Paul.
Yeah, that's huge.
That's a huge statement. So the question, of course, then needs to be asked is, how does one learn to meditate properly? And is there a proper way to meditate? If it's this important, I'd like to spend just a couple of minutes on it, if that's all right with you.
Of course.
Because in speaking to a great many people here on Vancouver Island, people meditate a lot or like to meditate a lot. But there seems to be so many different ideas about what meditation is. And of course, the to non-meditators, the thing that immediately comes to mind is the cross-legged with the eyes closed and sitting straight, holding your third finger and your thumb together, going Om Yaliman. And
Yep.
So what?
So that counts, but there are other ways.
Okay, so explain to me.
Yeah.
Does it have anything to do with reflection time? Are they connected in any way?
Well, let me try to make it seem a little less esoteric by saying meditation is simply being present in the moment. And so there's all kinds of things, walking, talking, doing yoga, any of those things could be ways that you bring stillness to the mind's desire to ruminate on the past or to worry about the future. And that's when we all do it, me included, after many, many, many years of meditating. Spent a lot of time in my past, and given I'm wired this way, I spend a lot of time in my future. When I'm not aware of what's happening in my mind, I'm probably somewhere in the future. And that's all well and good some of the time. I need to plan for my future. But if I'm not really aware of it, then I may be actually busy just spinning my wheels, worrying about things I've worried about umpteen times before. Some other people are more wired to think about the past, and so they'll be berating themselves for the mistake they made 5 years ago, and they've done it over and over and over and over again.
Yes.
And when we become conscious of what's happening in our mind and become conscious of what's happening right here, right now, as maybe even you and I are, and maybe your listeners are right now, if they're having this, listening to this radio program and they're completely focused there and their mind's not wandering, and they're aware that their mind is not wandering, then that's a meditative experience. Now, there are ways to cultivate greater present moment awareness, and some types of yoga would be a perfect example. Tai Chi, lots of movement activity can be a way of stilling the mind and bringing it to a singular focus on what's happening. Many joggers feel that. Not me. If I jog, my mind's busy racing off doing all kinds of things while it jogs. But other people just get in that flow. Now, so there's that kind of movement-based meditations. There's also little mindfulness exercises people could do at any time. You could, when you wash your hands, since that's something we often do frequently, people could simply try to bring awareness to the feeling of the soapy water on their hands and what that feels like, the warmth of the water, and bring a focus to that activity in this moment. And that's a meditative experience. The purest sense of a meditative experience is like what you described. It would be deliberately stilling the body and making stability in our physical self so that then we can bring stillness to our minds. And there's a few different approaches, and anyone could look up meditation training in their town of any size greater than a few thousand people, and I'm sure there'll be meditation centers there that have different methodologies for teaching those kind of focused stillness, body-mind meditation techniques, which I highly recommend.
And it's true. At least here on Vancouver Island, I found that you can't throw a small pebble without hitting another meditation guru, and perhaps that's a wonderful thing.
Yes, I hope all kinds of people are enhancing their happiness by visiting some of those gurus.
Okay, so thank you for that. So we've talked about meditation as a good step towards acquiring the calmness that allows happiness to enter, perhaps. What else can we do what steps can we take to deliberately try and create a little happiness or allow ourselves to feel a little happier?
Sure. Well, I'll give another big picture one, and then maybe we'll work down to some that are simpler, kind of quick hitters. But another big picture one, fundamental to our well-being, is healthy social relationships. Ed Diener is perhaps the lead researcher on this, but many others are working in this area. And again, this comes down to fundamentally how we have evolved as a human species. We basically, can I go into a little scientific explanation, Rosemary?
Yes, please.
So we've got 3 brains in our head. At the base of our brain, we have a reptilian brain. Over that, we have a mammalian brain, the brain of mammals. And over that, still, we have the cerebral cortex, the brain of primates, primarily. And we evolved quite efficiently. We didn't get rid of the reptilian brain. We just built onto it. So our reptilian brain is awesome. It does great things, all the things associated with automatic survival. Breathing, blinking our eyes, digesting our food, our heart beating, all those kind of things. Awesome, great that we have a reptilian brain. Nice to have it. Then as mammals evolved, well, and let me just say one more thing about the reptilian brain. Reptiles don't have many emotions. They basically have 2. Fear, and they run away, or, hey, I'm really chill, everything's okay in the moment. And that's kind of the emotional range of a reptile. And they don't much care for other reptiles, and generally they don't much care for their own young. That's why their young can be born from an egg and just go do their own thing. Right. Mammals, by contrast, evolved to raise young that needed a lot of care. And so when the mother cat gives birth to kittens, her rational reaction might be, these are kind of nasty, meowing, sucking little blind, almost naked things that want to hang on to me. The rational thing would be to walk away. But she doesn't. She loves these little things, genuinely, in the same way that we love things. That cat loves these kittens. The kittens love her back, and the evolution had a very basic reason for doing it. They created huge oxytocin, which is the attachment hormone that we have in our brains, so that we don't abandon our babies, and our babies don't abandon us, and we raise successful young. So that's how the first 2 evolutions of the brain took place. And the third one, when we built these huge cerebral cortexes, we tend to think in our society that we evolved that way to think, to solve problems, to logic our way through the universe. And it's true that the cerebral cortex is very helpful in that regard. But the evolutionary purpose would seem much more clear to be for bringing about sense and logic to very complex social relationships. So humans have stunningly complex social relationships. In fact, we even have these things called mirror neurons, where if you and I were looking at each other and not just on the radio here, if I smiled at you, within 33 one-thousandths of a second, that's 33 milliseconds, you'll smile back to me. And that's because you've got certain neurons in your brain that have no purpose other than to mimic the emotional expression that you're seeing on another face. And similarly, if I give you an expression of fear, immediately your face takes on that expression of fear. And the evolutionary purpose for that is that we primates, we tribal primates in particular, like humans are, we depend on one another for our survival. When I'm smiling and relaxed and we're out 10, 20, 15,000 years ago in the forest, sitting together, and I'm smiling, we're relaxed, and everybody's chilled in the tribe, we can tend to each other's needs, we can sleep, we can digest our food, we can contemplate what we learned that morning, everybody's relaxed. When one member of the tribe sees a tiger coming up from behind us and gets that fearful expression on their face, then it instantly spreads within milliseconds to the entire tribe. And these basic sharing of emotions that happens uniquely in humans and a few other primates are incredibly powerful survival mechanisms that we evolved to have. We don't stop and say, why is that person showing a fearful expression? I wonder if I should ask. Maybe when I'm finished playing with this stick, I'll inquire why Rosemary has a fearful expression. No, I'm immediately going to share your emotion, and we're going to survive together. We're all going to share that same emotion. Because we didn't evolve to have giant muscles or to run really fast or to have big fangs or hard armor on our bodies. We survive as tribes. And within those tribes, we have incredibly complex social relationships, including incredibly complex social hierarchies. And our brains have to sort all this stuff out, and we do it very automatically, and we do it through our emotions. So social relationships, a few, are critical for our well-being. It's wired into us to need these. And we don't need modern social media popularity. 1,000 friends on Facebook won't make you any happier. But one or two people who truly love you, and that you love back, that's what we need to be happy. If you got 10, a dozen, 20, that's all cool. But the 1,000 shallow Facebook friends probably aren't going to really do it.
No,
and honestly, Rosemary, if you don't have anybody at all, get yourself a cat or a dog, because it shares some of those basic mammalian attachment hormones that we do. And everybody who's had a cat or a dog knows that you can truly love your cat and your dog, and most of the time, they love you back.
Yes. And at least in the part of a dog, it's completely unquestioned. They will. There's a very trite saying, of course, but with a grain of truth to it. My hope is that I'll be the kind of the person my dog thinks I am.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I like that expression.
Yeah. So
talk about a related happiness technique to social relationships, and that's just practicing altruism. We can only speculate why it is that it makes us happy, but we know it when we study it in the laboratory. We ask people to do altruistic acts, and we can see, in fact, changes in their bloodstream, filling themselves with hormones associated with greater well-being. And we can do tests. There's a great test that was done with university students in the United States where they had them measure their level of personal happiness, then gave them $20 and said, go spend $20 on yourself, and then measured them again for their level of personal happiness. And not surprisingly, they felt a bit happier. Now, the researchers expected to get a different action on the next part of the test. They'd take a different group, measure them for their happiness, give them $20, and tell them to go spend the $20 on somebody else. And they were sure when they came back to measure their happiness again, they would see a decrease in their happiness. But they didn't find that. They found that these students who spent the money on other people were in fact not just a little bit happier than the other research subjects, but they were a lot happier. And the researchers were puzzled. They didn't know what to make of this. So I thought maybe it was just too little money. If we'd given people $1,000 to spend on themselves, they would have been a lot more happy. And if they'd had to spend $1,000 on somebody else, they would have been miserable. But nobody would give them that kind of money to do the experiment. So these guys were clever. They reached out to some very poor countries. India, and I think the other one that comes to mind was Nigeria, and had professors in those countries run the same experiment. And in Africa, in this African country, the $20 was worth the value of a family's food for a week. So they gave these people $20 to spend on themselves, and just as before in the United States, people were a little happier when they spent it on themselves. But when they spent $20 on someone else, someone who couldn't repay them, a genuine altruistic act, they were still a lot happier. So altruism has profoundly beneficial impacts on our emotional well-being. And I think, it's speculation, we don't know exactly why, it's tied to this notion that our social relationships are so critical for our survival as a group. It's why tribal behaviors that are supportive of the group as a whole have evolved to have big reward experiences for us, because our genetic traits are passed on through the survival of an entire group of people. Does that make sense?
It absolutely makes sense. And I'm here, sitting here, vibrating with examples of how the gift or the altruistic act doesn't have to be a physical thing. Simply sharing a smile with someone who wasn't expecting one
Totally.
can make you feel like you've given such a gift when their faces light up, that you've simply acknowledged that they are alive. And you get so much more than you give in treating human beings that way. And yes, because in order to survive, we want to survive as a tribe. To survive alone is hardly survival, right? And so it
And
all
indeed,
makes sense.
the worst of our emotions, I like the fact that that's a good segue, the very worst of our emotions is loneliness. We can kind of overcome fear sometimes, we can overcome sadness, but loneliness comes with a nasty kind of itch to it. Loneliness does not sit well. We can't sit with it very well at all. And the reason for that is because our ancestors, thousands of years ago, to be lonely meant that they were separated from the tribe, which was almost always a death sentence. We don't survive well in the forest all by ourselves. So whenever the tribe would push someone to the side and threaten them, or let them experience being cast out, the corrective emotion of loneliness was extraordinarily powerful and instructive. And so the contrast of loneliness, of course, is that sense of attachment and belonging. And as loneliness hurts so much, belonging rewards so much. And these emotions have evolved for good purposes. When we belong and are attached, we survive. When we're lonely and detached, survival is very difficult, and it's painful.
Well, that kind of reasoning explains gang activity a lot.
It does. Oddly, doesn't it? I mean, it's a sense of belonging that people have in the gang, and in spite of the fact that it's far, far from altruism, within the gang, you often see very altruistic acts. People doing great acts of loyalty to the gang to demonstrate the worthiness of their belonging.
Absolutely true. And it benefits the person doing it as much as it in fact, more so than the receiver of that sort of. So I hear you on that. Now, do you have any? We've gone through the altruism, we've gone through the meditation, and then you promised some little thumbnail ones that we could do right now, right today.
Sure. So here's one of them, and that is that sensory pleasures are a very quick and easy, accessible way to experience more happiness. The trick in our wealthy nations, wealthy North America, is that we often take for granted the physical pleasures in our life. The soft bed, the cold milk that you find in the fridge in the morning, or the bag of potato chips that you delve into in the evening. If we learn to savor our physical pleasures, when we deliberately put on a piece of music because we know we love it, and we say, oh, I'm going to put on Beethoven's Ninth Symphony because it moves me. And then when the music comes on, I actually listen. I'm focusing on it, sort of like a meditative experience.
Yes.
Then my ability to deeply enjoy it and feel genuine pleasure is much greater than if the music just plays in the background all the time. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. It's just that we probably aren't getting a lot of psychic benefit from the music just playing in the background. And similarly, if you're going to want a chocolate at 3 p.m, go for it. Have a chocolate. But don't eat the whole box full. Savor that one and fully enrich yourself in the experience of that sweet, bitter, gorgeous chocolate. And so physical pleasures are wonderful, and all of them. It's why, if I can get a little dirty here on your radio show. It's why sex is so wonderful. It's why we love to have sex. It's because so many of our physical sensory experiences are being activated at once. Now, the tricky thing with sensory experiences is that we tire of them. If I gave you chocolate cheesecake, which we love to eat, and I love that first slice, and your listeners would love the first slice, but if I said you must eat a second slice and a third slice and a fourth slice, at some point it actually becomes nauseating. It's anything but a pleasurable experience. And that's true for all of our sensory pleasures. They're meant to be tasted, heard, seen in bite-sized pieces that just are deeply rewarding and enjoyed for that moment, and then you need to move on to other things.
It sounds like mindfulness.
It is a mindfulness exercise, absolutely.
Yeah, fascinating. But you're right. You're right. If you made me eat 4 cheesecakes in a row, I would probably not enjoy it quite as much. And if you're eating it because you enjoy it, why would you? Anyway, so be it. I could go on about that for a long time. So now, what I want to trade topics just a little bit, unless you have something else to add to that one.
No, I don't.
Okay. I want to go into how this transfers. I mean, it's clear how this works for an individual, and it's clear how this works in small groups. So in our personal lives, we can transfer that. All right, I think. How does this transfer into the work world?
That's a great question, and it's one I spend a lot of time explaining. So, and this will be beneficial for all your listeners. When we are happy, we actually function at a higher level on many different levels. The research is abundantly clear that there's a powerful correlation between personal happiness and success. And the mistake is believing that it's on reaching success, then you're more happy. And to a degree, of course, momentarily that's true. You get the new promotion, the job that you wanted, and you feel elated, and you celebrate for dinner that evening, and 3 weeks later in the new job, you're no happier. But by contrast, if you're consistently experiencing more positive emotions, then a number of natural occurrences seem to occur. For example, we know that people who are happy tend to have greater incomes over time. People who are happy tend to live longer. They have better health generally, fewer colds and flus. People who are happy have warmer, deeper friendships and romantic relationships. People who are happy, when you can prime people to feel happy or sad, so you expose them to videos and sound that will make them feel one way or another, and people who are primed to feel negative, their creativity, their logic problems, their problem-solving skills, their memories all diminish. Whereas when people are primed to feel happy, they actually become more creative, better problem solvers, better memories. Even the amount of energy we have, the ability to just get through the day with a sense of vigor, goes up for people who have lots of positive emotions. So in the workplace, just as it applies in our personal lives, but in our workplaces, when we can create cultures of more positive emotions, where positive emotions are the norm and not the exception, then your workforce, in fact, walks around healthier, with less absenteeism, with better collegiality and working relationships, better problem-solving skills, better creativity, and just more energy. People are going to be able to give more in their workday than they would otherwise. So a lot of what I teach, I focus on how to bring about a culture in one's workplace or one's team, or in smaller groups, one's own family, so that we're getting these many, many benefits of happiness that I've just listed.
It's one of the topics that I speak about, Paul, is changing leadership paradigms for the 21st century, understanding the generational gap. But one of the things that I talk about for appropriate leadership skills is, in fact, why bother trying to keep your employees happy? And these are some of the things that I've actually touched on, but from a different angle. That it is vital to reach our millennial generation and our upcoming generation Z and the baby boomers and the X's, it's really important that they be kept that they be kept learning, that they be kept motivated, that they have that there's some reason for them to experience gratitude, that there are amusing things going on at work, all because the end output benefits everyone. And I'm not just talking about the final product that the company is creating, selling, marketing, whatever it is, but that the whole company is a happier place to be, and happier equals more productivity and far less absenteeism and strife and gossip around the water cooler.
You're totally right. And it's interesting that these younger generations are coming with different motivations to the workplace. And for the first time ever, most of our millennial new workers don't have an expectation to out-earn their parents. For the last 100 years, every generation came along and said, I'm going to do even better than mom and dad did economically. This new generation doesn't have that motivation.
No.
Instead, they want work to be interesting, meaningful, rewarding, giving them autonomy, giving them a sense of belonging and a sense of social relationships that are rewarding and enriching. Otherwise, why would I show up? And so we need different workforce motivators that are really, they're natural ones that all of us want, but some of us could be in previous generations more readily bought for money.
Yes. And yet there's complications with that all over the place. But yes, leaders can no longer rely on the one brushstroke to fit all employees. It simply doesn't work anymore. And primarily, it's because you have to keep your employees happy or they will not give you what you need, and therefore you're fighting a battle that need not be fought. So,
well, and you know, Rosemary, the leadership trend over the last 25 years made some fundamental mistakes, in my opinion. Like 25 years ago, when employee engagement became a topic of concern for large organizations, large and small organizations, they reached out for tools that weren't quote unquote bad, but they didn't achieve the results that they wanted. So they reached out for tools like saying, let's make sure that everybody who works here has a gym membership. Let's make sure that there are some of the favorite treats are stocked in the lunchroom. And if they were big enough, let's put a daycare down in the bottom of the building. And all those things are fabulous. They're great. I have no problems with them at all. But what they bought with those investments was employee loyalty to stay employed at that place. So people would say, the gym membership's great. The daycare is so convenient. I'm going to stay employed here. But if my boss is still a jerk, or the company still has a kind of a bad attitude, or we don't treat our customers with integrity, the underlying emotional commitment I make to the organization has not changed. I'm just going to stay. I'm parked, I'm present, but I'm no more committed or engaged. You haven't won my heart and mind by providing me a gym membership. Whereas when we change the emotional feel, when leaders come and say, I care about you, I'm interested in you, I want to give you autonomy, I want to grow you, and I'm just a pleasant person to work with, and I appreciate the things that you do, and I try to manage with a positive mood within my team, I don't need a gym membership. Boy, I'm showing up there practically as a volunteer because my heart and mind has to be volunteered. My labor, my body, you can pay me for that.
Exactly right. Oh my goodness, Paul, why don't we just go out and rule the world? I think
let's do it.
I think we can do a bloody fine job of it. So how do you you have a company called the Happiness Experts Company, and you are the Chief Happiness Officer. What do you do, Paul? I mean, in a day, I realize that it all has to do with happiness, but how do you do that? To whom do you reach? Who's your? What kind of clientele? Is it groups? Is it singular? Is it? What do you do, Paul?
Excellent question. It's quite varied. So as soon as I get off the call with you, I'm running downtown to meet with an executive for a large organization who, on a one-on-one basis, is working on changing his own personal style in terms of being the man, the leader that he wants to be. And I love doing that kind of work. And it often that comes is a spin-off from places where I've presented or leadership teams that I've worked with. So in addition to the one-on-one coaching, I do a lot of leadership training. That often looks like 1, 2, and 3 day workshops. I do a lot of keynote speeches, and it's funny how much of I can communicate, as we've done in the last 50-some minutes here. I can provide a lot of information that hopefully is inspiring and practical for people to use in that format. And in larger projects with big companies who are committed to making this change, I work more on a consultative basis for broad-brushed culture change for an organization, which almost invariably requires that at minimum, every person who's in a supervisory capacity gets some degree of training to say, we're changing the way that we do the role of leadership and do the and people resist this because we don't think we're doing this very much anymore, but we have command and control institutions that we've created. And so even people who come with very different motivations, they come into an institution that all it knows is command and control, and very good people end up as command and control leaders. And so when we want a broad-based culture change, we work with all the leaders to change the way that modern leadership needs to be done.
You must. You must, because it has to be within the company, a globally accepted way of doing things. There is a company in Seattle that sells fish. Have you heard of this place?
I don't think I have, though.
It's amazing. When I was, back in the days of the troglodytes, when I was training to be a teacher,
yes,
one of the things that they taught us was how to show up as a teacher. And it was about exactly this, the positive mindset, the searching for happiness, the giving people hope and all that sort of thing. And one of the movies that they showed us all was this company in Seattle where the people working there sold fish. It's dirty, it's stinky, they're dealing with ice, they're in rubber boots all day, and they were the happiest group of people you've ever seen in their life. When someone would ask for a fish, the other guy would yell it back or sing it back to someone else. The other guy they would do fish catching, and they would play games with the customers, and people came. It's a tourist place now, where people come worldwide to see this fish market, where these fishmongers are the happiest people in the world as they ply their trades selling fish, because globally that was the attitude that they wanted.
And that's such a perfect example of the way that these things have spin-offs and lives so much greater than we can anticipate. Like, not only does the leader get to be a happier human every day when they come to work, when they bring in modern leadership styles, but also their workforce is happier, and then they're more productive, they're more engaged, their customers are happier, their profitability goes up, and there's some pretty good research demonstrating an array of benefits, bottom line financial benefits, that come with bringing more positivity into a workplace.
I would hazard to say that aside from making sure that assembly lines run smoothly and that everyone knows what they should be doing, that the greatest gift that the head of an organization or a leader of any sort can bring to their work is to bring this attitude of happiness.
There's no doubt about it.
To make their company successful. I would hazard to say that it's as important as marketing. It's as important as analyzing. It's the treating the whole company and creating the atmosphere and the aura of happiness and a tribe is probably one of the most important things to do.
Companies that have done the opposite, when they get tight and get mean and get lean and treat their workforce sometimes not necessarily deliberately. I don't put poor motivations to the leadership style, but just get really tight and focused on productivity above all else. It's a beginning of the end. You can't sustain a successful organization if the foundation of it doesn't have people-centric, supportive, environments for people to be in, because people will vote with their hearts and minds even if their bodies stay in place.
Exactly right. So, Paul, we are just about out of time, if you can believe that. If people want to connect with you in this vitally important work, how can they do that?
Well, I am based here, like you, on Vancouver Island, so I have a Canadian website which ends with the little suffix CA. So my website is www.happinessexperts.ca. And people can look me up there, see a little bit about what we do, and by all means reach out and make contact with me. I'd love to hear from some of your listeners.
So I have written that down as well. So if anyone wants it but didn't have a chance to write it down, they can certainly contact me at Off the Coast, Views from Vancouver Island, on my website or through Confident Stages. And I'd be happy to forward that information along to you. Thank you, Paul. It has been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. I can't help but say it, don't worry, be happy.
Thanks so much for having me, Rosemary. It was a pleasure.
Okay, Paul, thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Rosemary Barnes, the Maverick Voice at Confident Stages, thanking you for joining us today on the show, and I look forward to talking with you again next week.
Thank you for listening to Off the Coast, Views from Vancouver Island, with host Rosemary Barnes. To book Rosemary as a speaker or speaking coach, or to offer suggestions of extraordinary guests for the show, please visit her website at www.confidentstages.com.